Imagine this Sarah Mitchell, a glamorous 38-year-old wife in the lap of luxury, 7 months pregnant with her miracle baby after years of heartbreak. She's got the perfect life, a tech millionaire husband, a mansion in Greenwich, and her best friend by her side. But one innocent phone notification shatters it all: explicit photos, cruel messages, and a web of lies revealing her husband's affair with her closest confidant. As Sarah uncovers offshore accounts, stolen assets, and a plot to steal her unborn child, the twists keep coming, from coffee fights gone viral to FBI investigations and shocking DNA secrets. Is this just a midlife crisis or something far more sinister? Stick around as I narrate this epic 10-chapter saga of betrayal, revenge, and redemption. You won't believe the ending. If you're hooked already, smash that like button to show some love. Drop a comment with what you do in Sarah's shoes. Share this with your drama-loving friends, and hit subscribe with notifications on so you never miss a story like this. Let's jump in. Sarah Mitchell adjusted her silk Hermes scarf as she settled into the plush leather chair of Dr. Amanda Wilson's obstetrics office in Greenwich, Connecticut. At 38, she radiated the kind of effortless elegance that money could buy. Designer maternity dress hugging her 7-month bump. Cartier watch catching the afternoon light. Perfectly highlighted blonde hair swept into a chic low bun. This was supposed to be one of the happiest moments of her life. Carrying her first child after years of trying. The waiting room buzzed with other expectant mothers, most scrolling through their phones while partners rubbed their backs or held their hands. Sarah sat alone, as she had for the past 3 appointments. David, her husband of 10 years, was always too busy running his $50 million tech empire to attend these routine visits. She pulled out her iPhone, intending to check her calendar for tonight's charity gala, the Greenwich Hospital Foundation dinner, where David would receive an award for his generous donations. As she unlocked her phone, a notification popped up that made her heart skip a beat. Shared photos from David. Her finger hovered over the screen. They had set up shared iCloud albums years ago for convenience, but David rarely used it. Curiosity got the better of her. Sarah tapped the notification. The first image that loaded made her world tilt sideways. It was a photo of her best friend Jessica Martinez, but not the Jessica she knew from their weekly lunch dates and shopping trips. This Jessica was wearing nothing but black lingerie, posed provocatively in what looked like a hotel room. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she frantically scrolled through more images. Dozens of them, all featuring Jessica in various states of undress, some clearly taken in intimate moments. But it was the messages that destroyed her completely. David's voice, recorded and sent through the album. God, I can't wait to leave Sarah and start our real life together. This baby was such a mistake. She's gotten so fat and boring since she got pregnant. You're everything she used to be and more. Jessica's response, sultry and confident. Soon, baby. Once the kid is born and we can arrange custody, we'll have everything we want. The house, the money, and each other. Sarah will never see it coming. The coffee cup slipped from Sarah's trembling hands, hitting the marble floor with a crash that echoed through the waiting room. Hot liquid splashed across her Jimmy Choo pumps, but she barely noticed. Her entire body had gone numb as she continued reading months of betrayal laid out in explicit detail. More messages revealed the devastating scope of their deception. Jessica, who worked as a financial advisor at Morgan Stanley, had been helping David move assets offshore for over a year. They had been planning this betrayal while Sarah nursed morning sickness, while she decorated the nursery, while she dreamed of their family's future. Mrs. Mitchell, Dr. Wilson's nurse called out, her voice seeming to come from underwater. We're ready for you. Sarah looked up, realizing the entire waiting room was staring at her. Coffee pooled around her feet, her phone still clutched in her white-knuckled grip, tears streaming down her face in mascara-stained rivers. I thought I was Alicia Florrick from The Good Wife, she whispered to herself, referencing the TV show character who had faced similar betrayal with dignity and strength. But I'm just another naive wife who never saw it coming. As she mechanically followed the nurse down the hallway, Sarah's mind raced through a decade of memories. Jessica had been her maid of honor, the first person she told about the pregnancy, the friend who held her hand through 3 miscarriages before this miracle baby. They had grown up together in small-town Ohio before Sarah moved to Connecticut after marrying David. Jessica had followed a year later, claiming she wanted to be closer to her best friend. It was all a lie. During the ultrasound, Sarah watched her daughter's perfect profile on the screen while Dr. Wilson cheerfully explained the baby's development. "Everything looks wonderful, Sarah. Baby girl is measuring right on track for a February delivery. Are you excited to meet her?" Sarah nodded numbly, unable to find her voice. How could she explain that she was terrified to bring a child into a world where the 2 people she trusted most had been systematically destroying her life after the appointment? Sarah sat in her Range Rover in the hospital parking garage, rain beginning to patter against the windshield like tears from heaven. She stared at the ultrasound photos of her daughter, the tiny hands, the perfect nose, the peaceful expression of a child who had no idea she was about to be born into chaos. Her phone continued to buzz with new messages between David and Jessica. She couldn't stop reading, torturing herself with each new revelation. They had been intimate in her house, in her bed, while she attended book club meetings and prenatal yoga classes. Jessica knew intimate details about Sarah's insecurities, her fears about motherhood, her desperate desire to give David the family he claimed to want. The rain intensified, turning into a proper Connecticut downpour. Sarah's hands shook as she scrolled through evidence of her own destruction. Financial documents showed David had been systematically emptying their joint accounts. Real estate records revealed he had secretly mortgaged their Greenwich mansion. Even her credit cards had been quietly canceled that morning. She was 7 months pregnant, financially ruined, and emotionally shattered. The woman she considered her sister had stolen her husband, and the man she loved was treating her like an obstacle to remove rather than the mother of his child. Sarah's phone rang, making her jump. David's name appeared on the screen, along with his photo, a professional headshot from his company website where he looked successful and trustworthy. Everything about their life together had been a performance. She declined the call and started the engine. There was only one place to go now, home, where she would have to confront the 2 people who had destroyed her world. As she pulled out of the parking garage, Sarah caught sight of herself in the rearview mirror. Her makeup was ruined, her perfect hair disheveled, her expensive outfit stained with coffee. But her eyes held something new, a spark of determination that surprised even her. Maybe she was more like Alicia Florrick than she thought. The question was whether she had the strength to fight for herself and her unborn daughter. The drive home to Greenwich felt like a funeral procession. Every familiar landmark, the country club where she and David had their engagement party, the boutique where Jessica helped her pick out maternity clothes, the restaurant where the 3 of them celebrated last New Year's Eve, now felt like crime scenes of her own naivety. As Sarah turned into their circular driveway, her heart dropped to her stomach. Jessica's red BMW was parked right next to David's Porsche, as if she already lived there, as if Sarah was the intruder in her own home. The betrayal was complete, but Sarah's story was just beginning. Sarah sat in her car for several minutes, engine off, staring at Jessica's BMW like it was a venomous snake coiled in her driveway. Through the expansive windows of their Georgian colonial mansion, she could see movement in David's home office, shadows dancing against the warm light of the room where she had often brought him coffee during late-night work sessions. The rain had stopped, but dark clouds still threatened overhead, matching Sarah's mood perfectly. She gathered her courage and walked toward the house, using her key to enter through the mudroom rather than the grand front entrance. If she was going to catch them in the act, she needed the element of surprise. The sound of laughter drifted from David's office as Sarah slipped off her heels and padded silently across the marble foyer. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she worried it might wake the baby, who had been unusually active since the shocking discovery at the doctor's office. "I can't believe she still doesn't know," Jessica's voice carried clearly down the hallway. "She actually asked me to help her plan the nursery last week. I almost felt bad for her." "Don't." David's voice was cold. Nothing like the warm tone he used with Sarah. She made this easy by being so trusting. Did you get the Bermuda account set up? All done. By the time she figures out what's happening, there won't be anything left for her to take. The prenup you had her sign protects everything anyway. Sarah pressed herself against the wall, fighting waves of nausea that had nothing to do with pregnancy. Through the partially open door, she could see Jessica sitting on the edge of David's desk, wearing a red dress Sarah recognized from their shopping trip last month. Jessica was trying on Sarah's jewelry, the diamond tennis bracelet David had given her for their 5th anniversary, the emerald earrings from their last vacation to Italy. "These will look so much better on me than they ever did on her," Jessica said, admiring the earrings in David's computer screen reflection. She never had the style to carry off real jewelry anyway. David laughed, a sound Sarah had once found charming, but now recognized as cruel. "After the baby comes and we arrange custody, we can take that European honeymoon we've been planning. I've already booked the same villa in Tuscany where I proposed to her. Poetic justice, don't you think?" The same villa? Sarah's knees nearly buckled. That sacred place where David had gotten down on one knee overlooking the vineyards, where he had promised to love and cherish her forever, where she had been so happy she cried tears of joy. He was planning to take her best friend there, to recreate their most precious memory as if Sarah had never existed. "What about the baby?" Jessica asked, fastening the tennis bracelet around her wrist. "I'm not interested in playing stepmom to her little accident. We'll work something out. Boarding school, maybe, or she can live with Sarah's mother in Ohio. Either way, it won't be our problem." Sarah's daughter chose that moment to kick vigorously, as if protesting the casual way her father was discussing abandoning her. Sarah placed both hands on her belly, whispering a silent promise to her unborn child that she would never let these people hurt her. She pulled out her phone and began recording, capturing both the conversation and the video evidence of Jessica wearing her jewelry. This was no longer just about heartbreak. This was about survival. "I do feel a little guilty sometimes," Jessica continued, examining Sarah's engagement ring on her finger. "She's been such a good friend all these years." "Please," David scoffed. "You said yourself she's been boring since the pregnancy started. No more spontaneous trips. No more fun parties. She's turned into one of those suburban mom stereotypes. You're doing me a favor by giving me a reason to leave." Sarah had heard enough. She stepped into the doorway, phone still recording, and cleared her throat. "Having fun with my jewelry. Jess?" Both Jessica and David spun around, faces draining of color. Jessica's hand flew to the tennis bracelet as if she could hide it, while David immediately stood up, knocking over his coffee mug in the process. "Sarah," David stammered, moving toward her with his arms outstretched. "Honey, this isn't what it looks like." "Really?" Sarah's voice was deadly calm. "Because it looks like my husband and my best friend are planning my destruction while playing dress-up with my jewelry. But please, tell me what it actually looks like." Jessica had the audacity to look defiant rather than ashamed. "Sarah, you need to understand that David and I never meant for this to happen. It just evolved naturally." "Evolved naturally?" Sarah's composure cracked. "You've been planning this for over a year. I have the photos, the messages, the financial records. I know about Bermuda, about the custody arrangements, about your romantic European getaway to my honeymoon spot." David's face shifted from shock to anger. "You went through my phone. That's a violation of privacy." "Sarah." "Privacy?" Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You shared those photos on our family iCloud account. Genius. In violation of privacy. What do you call having an affair with my best friend in my house? Using my money to finance your escape plan." "Look," Jessica stood up, still wearing Sarah's jewelry like armor. "The truth is, David and I are better suited for each other. You've let yourself go since the pregnancy. You're not the woman he married anymore." The cruelty of those words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She looked down at her maternity dress, suddenly self-conscious about her rounded belly, her fuller face, her body that was growing David's child. "You're right," Sarah said quietly. I'm not the woman he married. I'm stronger now, and I'm done being your victim. She turned and walked away, ignoring David's calls after her. Let them think they had won this round. Tomorrow, she would show them exactly what the new Sarah Mitchell was capable of. The next morning, Sarah drove to the upscale shopping center in downtown Greenwich, where she knew Jessica often grabbed coffee before work. She had barely slept, her mind racing with plans and the baby kicking restlessly as if sensing her mother's turmoil. She spotted Jessica immediately at the outdoor Starbucks, sitting at a table in the sun, scrolling through her phone with a satisfied smile. Sarah approached slowly, her heart pounding but her resolve stronger than ever. Jessica, she said, standing beside the table. Jessica looked up, and for a moment, Sarah saw a flicker of genuine remorse in her eyes, but it vanished quickly, replaced by cold calculation. Sarah, look, about yesterday. No, Sarah interrupted, sitting down uninvited. You don't get to explain this away. 15 years of friendship, and you throw it all away for what money status a man who's already shown you he's capable of betraying someone he claims to love. Jessica's facade slipped. You don't understand what it's like to watch you have everything handed to you. The perfect husband, the beautiful house, more money than you could ever spend. Some of us have had to work for everything we have. Handed to me, Sarah's voice rose slightly. I worked full-time while David built his company. I organized every social event that helped him network. I gave up my own career dreams to support his ambitions. And you were supposed to be my friend through all of it. Friend, Jessica laughed bitterly. You mean your charity case, the girl from the wrong side of town that you kept around to make yourself feel generous? The accusation stung because there was a grain of truth to it. In college, Sarah had sometimes felt protective of Jessica, who worked 2 jobs while Sarah's parents paid her tuition, but she had never thought of their friendship as charity. That's not fair, and you know it. Fair, Jessica's voice turned vicious. Fair would be you recognizing that you're not special just because you married money. Fair would be admitting that you've gotten lazy and boring since you got pregnant. Fair would be stepping aside gracefully instead of forcing David to sneak around. Something inside Sarah snapped. She picked up Jessica's iced coffee and threw it directly at her former best friend's face. The cold liquid splashed across Jessica's white silk blouse and into her hair, causing her to shriek and jump up from the table. But Sarah's satisfaction was short-lived. As Jessica flailed backward, some of the coffee splashed back, and the ice cubes hit Sarah's arm, causing her to instinctively jerk away. In her pregnancy clumsiness, Sarah's elbow knocked over her own hot coffee, which spilled down her leg and onto her hand. The burning sensation made her cry out in pain, and she looked down to see an angry red mark spreading across her palm. Around them, other cafe patrons had their phones out, recording what would become the infamous Greenwich socialite coffee fight that would plague Sarah for months to come. You crazy psycho, Jessica screamed, her carefully styled hair dripping with iced coffee. You could have hurt your baby. What kind of mother are you going to be? The comment hit Sarah harder than the burn on her hand. She looked around at the crowd of people filming her public breakdown and realized she had just given David and Jessica exactly what they needed. Evidence that she was unstable, unfit to be a mother, dangerous. As Jessica stormed off, muttering about pressing charges, Sarah sat alone at the coffee-stained table, holding her burned hand and watching strangers post videos of her lowest moment to social media. By evening, the clips would have thousands of views and hundreds of comments questioning her mental state and fitness as a mother. She had played right into their hands. But as Sarah drove home, nursing her burned hand and her wounded pride, her phone rang with an unexpected call. Dr. Patricia Morrison, Manhattan's most exclusive couples therapist, was calling to confirm an appointment David had apparently booked for them. Mrs. Mitchell, I have you and your husband down for tomorrow at 2 p.m. I understand you're working through some marital difficulties. For a moment, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. Maybe David did want to save their marriage. Maybe the whole scene with Jessica had been some kind of midlife crisis that therapy could fix. Yes, she heard herself saying, we'll be there. That night, David came home with flowers and apologies, swearing the affair was over and begging for another chance. For the first time in days, Sarah allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild their family before the baby arrived. She had no idea that David was already planning to use every word she said in therapy against her in court. Dr. Patricia Morrison's Manhattan office screamed understated wealth. Persian rugs, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes, and a view of Central Park that probably cost more per month than most people's annual salaries. Sarah sat in the butter-soft leather chair, her hands folded protectively over her belly, while David positioned himself strategically across the room near the window. I'm glad you both decided to seek help, Dr. Morrison began, her voice professionally warm but detached. She was exactly what Sarah expected from Manhattan's elite therapy circles. Impeccably dressed, expensively educated, and charging $800 per hour to fix rich people's problems. I love my wife, David said, his voice breaking with what sounded like genuine emotion. This whole situation with Jessica got out of hand, but I'm committed to our marriage and our family. Sarah wanted to believe him. Despite everything she had discovered, part of her still hoped that 10 years of marriage meant something, that the man she fell in love with was still somewhere underneath the betrayal. Sarah, how are you feeling about David's commitment to ending the affair? Doctor, Morrison asked. I want to believe him, Sarah replied carefully. But trust has to be rebuilt through actions, not just words. Over the next 3 sessions, Sarah found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected. She talked about feeling isolated during her pregnancy, about her fears of becoming a mother, about how David's increasingly frequent business trips had left her feeling abandoned even before she knew about Jessica. I sometimes wonder if I stopped being interesting to him, Sarah admitted during their 3rd session. I've been so focused on the baby and getting ready for motherhood that maybe I forgot to be a wife. David reached over and took her hand. No, Sarah, this isn't your fault. I made terrible choices, and I take full responsibility. Dr. Morrison made notes on her tablet. David, what specifically are you doing to rebuild trust with Sarah? I've cut all contact with Jessica. I've started coming home earlier from work. And I want to be completely transparent about our finances going forward. That last comment should have been Sarah's first warning. After their 4th session, Sarah felt genuinely hopeful for the first time in weeks. David had been attentive and affectionate, helping her prepare the nursery and even attending a parenting class. He brought her breakfast in bed and talked excitedly about their daughter's future. But her hope shattered completely when she returned home from a prenatal massage to find a stack of legal documents on the kitchen counter. The papers were from David's law firm, not the family attorney who had handled their estate planning, but a high-powered litigation firm known for representing wealthy men in contentious divorces. Sarah's hands trembled as she read through pages of financial disclosures that painted a picture of their assets she didn't recognize. According to these documents, their Greenwich mansion was mortgaged far beyond its value. The investment accounts she thought contained millions showed balances in the thousands. David's company stock, which had been worth $50 million last year, was now listed as worthless due to market volatility and poor management decisions. Sarah called their financial advisor immediately. Mrs. Mitchell, Robert Chen's voice was uncomfortable. I'm not supposed to discuss account details, but I think you should know that Mr. Mitchell moved most of your joint assets into offshore trusts about 18 months ago. He said it was for tax purposes. 18 months ago, Sarah's voice cracked. But we've been trying to get pregnant for 2 years. He was moving money while we were doing fertility treatments. The timeline hit her like a sledgehammer. David had been planning his exit strategy since before she even conceived. The fertility treatments, the excitement about finally getting pregnant, his promises about being a devoted father, it had all been performance art while he systematically dismantled their financial life. Sarah hung up and immediately called her own attorney. But the news got worse. The prenuptial agreement she had signed in a love-drunk haze 10 years ago was ironclad. She was entitled to minimal support and no share of David's business assets. The house, the cars, even her jewelry were technically owned by trusts that David controlled. "But what about the baby?" Sarah asked. "Surely I'm entitled to child support." "Child support, yes, but the amount will be calculated based on David's reported income, which according to these documents has decreased substantially. And Sarah," her lawyer's voice was gentle but firm, "you need to know that the coffee incident is being used as evidence that you might not be fit for primary custody." Sarah's world tilted sideways. She was 7 months pregnant, essentially penniless, and facing the possibility of losing custody of her unborn daughter to a man who had called the baby an accident just days earlier. That evening, she confronted David in his office. "How long have you been planning this?" she asked, spreading the legal documents across his desk. David didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. "Sarah, you're being dramatic. This is just financial planning. Rich people protect their assets. It's not personal." "Not personal." Sarah's voice rose. "You've been systematically stealing from our marriage for 18 months. You were planning to abandon me before I was even pregnant." "Look." David's mask finally slipped completely. "You're not the woman I married. You've become clingy and boring and obsessed with getting pregnant. I tried to make it work, but we want different things now. Different things, like financial security for our child, like honesty in our marriage. I've set aside money for child support. You'll be fine." "How much money, David?" His silence spoke volumes. "The therapy sessions," Sarah realized with growing horror. "You've been recording them, haven't you? Building a case that I'm unstable?" David's slight smile confirmed her worst fears. "Dr. Morrison is very thorough in her documentation. Your emotional volatility has been well documented." Sarah felt the baby kick hard against her ribs, as if her daughter was protesting the injustice of it all. The stress of the confrontation was causing contractions, not real labor, but Braxton Hicks contractions that made her double over in pain. "Sarah," David's voice changed, sounding almost concerned. "Are you okay?" "No," Sarah gasped, clutching her belly as another contraction hit. "I'm not okay, and neither is your daughter." She made it to her car before the next contraction hit, this one strong enough to take her breath away. Sarah drove herself to Greenwich Hospital, calling her obstetrician on the way. "I'm having contractions every 5 minutes," she told Dr. Wilson's answering service. "I'm 30 weeks pregnant." At the hospital, Sarah was hooked up to monitors that showed her blood pressure dangerously elevated and contractions that were too regular for comfort. Dr. Wilson arrived within an hour, her face grave as she reviewed the readings. "Sarah, we need to stop this labor. You're under enormous stress, and your body is responding by trying to deliver the baby early. We're going to give you medications to stop the contractions and steroids to help develop the baby's lungs, in case we can't stop them." As Sarah lay in the hospital bed, IV in her arm and monitors beeping around her, she watched Eat, Pray, Love on her tablet through tears. Elizabeth Gilbert's journey of self-discovery after her own devastating divorce felt like a roadmap for survival. "I won't let them break me," Sarah whispered to her unborn daughter. "Whatever it takes, I'm going to protect you." But even as she made that promise, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from David. "In Bermuda on emergency business. We'll be back when the medical situation is resolved." He wasn't even pretending to care anymore. While Sarah fought to keep their daughter safe inside her womb, David was setting up bank accounts in a country with no extradition treaty. Her mother arrived from Ohio that night, taking a red-eye flight and showing up in the hospital room with fierce determination and a bag full of homemade cookies. "Mom," Sarah sobbed into her shoulder, "I've lost everything." "No, honey," her mother said firmly, "you've lost some things, but you haven't lost everything, and you certainly haven't lost the fight." As Sarah finally fell asleep with her mother holding her hand, she didn't know that the worst was yet to come. In just a few hours, her water would break during what was supposed to be a routine legal mediation session, forcing her into premature labor while David was nowhere to be found. The asset protection scheme was just the beginning. David's real plan was far more devastating than even Sarah could imagine. Sarah's water broke at 9:47 a.m. during what was supposed to be a routine mediation session in her attorney's downtown Greenwich office. She had been 32 weeks pregnant, sitting across from David's legal team, listening to them explain why she deserved nothing from her 10-year marriage when she felt the unmistakable gush of amniotic fluid. "Oh God," she gasped, looking down at the spreading wetness on the conference room chair. "The baby's coming." The next few hours passed in a blur of ambulance sirens, hospital corridors, and medical teams speaking in urgent, clipped tones. Dr. Wilson met them at Greenwich Hospital's labor and delivery unit, her face tight with concern. "Sarah, we're going to do everything we can to slow this down. But if your body is determined to deliver, we need to be ready." Dr. Wilson explained as nurses hooked Sarah up to monitors. 32 weeks isn't ideal, but babies born at this stage have excellent survival rates with proper care. David was supposedly on a business emergency in Bermuda. At least that's what his assistant told the hospital when they called. Sarah labored alone except for her mother, who had stayed in Greenwich after Sarah's previous hospital scare. "Where is he?" Sarah panted between contractions. "His daughter is being born, and he's setting up bank accounts in the Caribbean." Her mother held her hand, fury radiating from every line of her face. "Focus on the baby. Sweetie, David will have to live with missing this moment for the rest of his life." Emma Rose Mitchell entered the world at 11:23 p.m., weighing 4 pounds 2 ounces, with a cry that was surprisingly strong for such a tiny baby. She was immediately whisked away to the neonatal intensive care unit, leaving Sarah exhausted and empty-armed. "She's beautiful, Sarah," Dr. Wilson said gently. "Her lungs are functioning well, and all her vital signs are strong. She's a fighter, just like her mother." David showed up 3 days later, reeking of alcohol and sporting a tan that made Sarah's blood boil. He stumbled into the NICU wearing a wrinkled suit and designer sunglasses, clearly still drunk from whatever Caribbean celebration he'd been enjoying while his daughter fought for life in an incubator. "There's my little princess," he slurred, swaying slightly as he looked at Emma through the clear plastic walls of her isolette. Several nurses exchanged concerned glances. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step out," the head NICU nurse said firmly. "We don't allow visitors who appear to be under the influence." "Under the influence?" David laughed loudly, causing other parents in the NICU to turn and stare. "I'm celebrating my daughter was born 3 days ago," Sarah said quietly from her wheelchair. "Your daughter was born 3 days ago, and you were too busy with Jessica in Bermuda to care." David's face darkened. "Don't start with me, Sarah. I was handling business that will secure our daughter's future." "Our daughter's future?" Sarah gestured toward the tiny baby surrounded by wires and monitors. "Her future is right here, fighting for every breath while you were living it up on the beach with your mistress." "That's enough," David snapped, his public mask slipping completely. "You're being hysterical, as usual." "Cherie." What Sarah didn't know was that David's drunken NICU outburst was being recorded by security cameras and witnessed by a room full of medical professionals who would later testify that he showed no appropriate emotional response to his premature daughter's condition. The next week brought a legal nightmare that made Sarah's financial devastation look simple by comparison. David filed for emergency custody of Emma, claiming that Sarah's documented mental instability made her an unfit mother. The petition cited the coffee shop incident, complete with social media videos and witness statements from other customers. It referenced Dr. Morrison's therapy notes, which had been subpoenaed and painted Sarah as emotionally volatile and potentially dangerous. Most damaging of all, it included security footage from the hospital showing Sarah becoming hysterical and confrontational during David's NICU visit. "They're claiming you're a threat to Emma's safety," Sarah's attorney explained during an emergency meeting. "David's team is arguing that the stress of your custody could harm the baby's development." "But she's my daughter," Sarah protested. "I've been at her bedside every day since she was born. I'm the one who learned how to change her diaper around IV lines. who holds her for hours during skin-to-skin contact. David has visited twice in 2 weeks. The legal system doesn't always reflect reality, her attorney warned, especially when one party has unlimited resources and the other is struggling financially. The media attention made everything worse. Connecticut's social media exploded with the story of the Greenwich socialites' public breakdown. Gossip blogs picked up the narrative, painting Sarah as an unstable gold digger who had trapped a successful businessman with an unwanted pregnancy. Greenwich Millionaire's pregnant wife's public meltdown caught on camera. Read the headline on Greenwich Today, a local blog that specialized in society gossip. The article included stills from the coffee shop video, making Sarah look crazed and dangerous. The comments section was brutal. "She looks psychotic in that video. I wouldn't trust her with a pet, let alone a baby." Classic gold digger trying to secure her meal ticket with a pregnancy. Glad the husband figured it out. Feel sorry for that poor baby. Hope the dad gets custody before she hurts the kid. Sarah's world had shrunk to the NICU, where she spent 18 hours a day holding Emma, pumping breast milk, and learning to navigate the maze of machines keeping her daughter alive. The other NICU parents became her only source of support, particularly Maria Santos, a single mother whose son Diego had been born at 28 weeks. "The first few weeks are the hardest," Maria told Sarah one night as they both sat in the pumping room at 3 a.m. "But these babies are stronger than anyone gives them credit for, and so are their mothers." Maria worked 2 jobs to support Diego and had no family nearby, but she somehow managed to maintain a positive attitude that Sarah envied. "How do you do it?" Sarah asked. "How do you stay strong when everything is falling apart?" "Because giving up isn't an option," Maria replied simply. "These babies need us to be warriors, not victims. You can fall apart later, after she's home safe." It was during one of these late-night NICU sessions that Sarah's world collapsed completely. She was pumping breast milk in the small lactation room, watching Emma sleep peacefully in her isolette through the window. When Jessica walked into the NICU, Jessica was wearing Sarah's engagement ring. Not a similar ring, Sarah's actual engagement ring. The 2-carat princess cut diamond that David had custom designed for their proposal in Tuscany. Sarah would recognize it anywhere, down to the tiny flaw in the stone that made it unique. "What are you doing here?" Sarah stood up so quickly that the breast pump tubing tangled around her feet. Jessica smiled, the same warm smile she had worn throughout 15 years of friendship. "I came to meet my stepdaughter," she said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Stepdaughter." Sarah's voice rose, causing other parents to look over with concern. "David and I are engaged," Jessica announced, holding up her left hand so the ring caught the harsh, fluorescent lighting. "We wanted to tell you in person rather than let you find out from someone else." Sarah stared at her engagement ring on Jessica's finger and felt something inside her break completely. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. This was psychological warfare designed to destroy her utterly. "You can't be serious," Sarah whispered. "Your stepdaughter. She's my daughter. Mine. I'm the one who carried her, who's been here every day since she was born. Actually," Jessica's voice took on a legal tone that made Sarah's blood run cold. "David and I are planning to petition for custody together. As a stable, married couple, we can provide Emma with the kind of environment she deserves." "Married couple," Sarah repeated numbly. "We're getting married next month in a small ceremony. Nothing fancy. We want to focus on building our family." Jessica glanced toward Emma's isolette with a proprietary air that made Sarah feel physically sick. "You're not her family," Sarah said, her voice barely audible. I'm her mother. Biology isn't everything. Sarah, what matters is who can provide the best home. And honestly, looking at you now." Jessica's eyes took in Sarah's unwashed hair, her milk-stained hospital scrubs, her exhausted face. "I think we both know Emma deserves better." That night, Sarah sat in the NICU at 3 a.m., pumping breast milk while watching her daughter sleep. She had $847 in her personal checking account, no home to return to, and a baby who might not survive her first weeks of life. David hadn't visited in 5 days, and now she knew why. He was planning a wedding with her former best friend. The ultimate despair moment came as Sarah watched other families. Fathers sleeping in uncomfortable chairs beside their babies' isolettes. Mothers taking turns holding preemie twins. Grandparents taking shifts so parents could rest. Sarah had no one except her mother, who had to return to Ohio for work the next day. The harsh hospital lighting made everything look stark and unforgiving. Sarah's reflection in the window showed a woman she barely recognized, hollow-eyed, pale, defeated. She was the mother of a premature baby fighting for life, abandoned by her husband, betrayed by her best friend, and facing the possibility of losing custody of her daughter to the people who had destroyed her life. But as Sarah watched Emma's tiny chest rise and fall with each determined breath, she made a decision that would change everything. She pulled out her phone and began documenting her story, not for sympathy, but for evidence. If David and Jessica wanted a war, they would get one. She had no idea that her social media documentation would eventually become the key to exposing a pattern of financial abuse that went far beyond her own marriage. The sight of Jessica wearing her engagement ring haunted Sarah for days. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that 2-carat princess cut diamond catching the NICU's fluorescent lighting, a symbol of promises that had been nothing but lies from the beginning. Sarah had been staying in a cramped studio apartment near the hospital, using the small inheritance from her grandmother to pay month-to-month rent. It was a far cry from the Greenwich mansion where she had planned to bring Emma home, but at least it was within walking distance of the NICU. 3 weeks after Emma's birth, Sarah received a call that sent her rushing to the hospital. Emma's oxygen levels had dropped, and she was being treated for a common but serious preemie complication called necrotizing enterocolitis. Sarah spent the next 48 hours by her daughter's bedside, watching monitors and praying while medical teams worked to save her baby's life. David finally showed up on the second day, but he wasn't alone. Jessica accompanied him, wearing a new designer dress and Sarah's pearl necklace, another piece of jewelry that held sentimental value from Sarah's grandmother. "How is she?" David asked, his voice carrying what sounded like genuine concern as he looked at Emma, who now had even more tubes and wires than before. "She's fighting," Sarah replied, not looking away from her daughter. "The doctors say the next 24 hours are critical." Jessica moved closer to the esaulette, studying Emma with the detached interest of someone examining an acquisition. "She's so small. Are you sure she's going to be normal? I mean, cognitively." The question was so callous that even David looked uncomfortable. "Jess, that's not—" "I'm just asking practical questions," Jessica interrupted. "If we're going to be responsible for her care, we need to know what we're dealing with." Sarah turned to face them both, her exhaustion temporarily replaced by pure fury. "You're not going to be responsible for anything. She's my daughter." "Actually," Jessica pulled a legal document from her purse, "we've been granted temporary visitation rights pending the custody hearing. We're entitled to make medical decisions for Emma." Sarah's attorney had warned her this might happen, but seeing the legal papers made it real. David's unlimited resources had bought him rights to their daughter, while Sarah was barely keeping her head above water financially. "And Sarah," David's voice took on the patronizing tone she had come to hate, "Jessica and I want to discuss something with you." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a check, $10,000 made out to Sarah Mitchell, with baby expenses written in the memo line. "We know you're struggling financially," David continued. "This should help cover Emma's medical costs and get you back on your feet." For a moment, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. Maybe David did feel some responsibility for their daughter. Maybe this was the beginning of working together for Emma's sake. "There are no strings attached," Jessica added with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We just want what's best for Emma." Sarah took the check with trembling hands. $10,000 would cover her rent for several months and help with the mounting medical bills that insurance didn't cover. It felt like a lifeline thrown to someone drowning. "Thank you," she whispered, feeling guilty for accepting money from the people who had destroyed her life, but desperate enough to take it anyway. That night, David asked to speak with her privately in the hospital cafeteria. For the first time in weeks, he sounded like the man she had married, gentle, concerned, almost loving. "Sarah, I know things have been awful between us," he began, reaching across the table to touch her hand. "But seeing Emma fight like this, it's made me realize what's really important." Sarah's heart began to race. Could this be the moment everything turned around? "I've been thinking about us, about our family," David continued. "Maybe we moved too fast with the divorce proceedings. Maybe we should try couples therapy again, but with a different therapist this time. Someone who can help us rebuild trust." "What about Jessica?" Sarah asked, hardly daring to hope. David looked down at his coffee cup. "Jessica and we got caught up in something that wasn't real. You're Emma's mother. You're my wife. That has to mean something." "It means everything to me," Sarah said, tears starting to flow. "David, I never stopped loving you, even after everything. I just want our family to be whole." They talked for over an hour about starting fresh, about moving past the betrayal, about raising Emma together. David apologized repeatedly, saying the affair was the biggest mistake of his life. He even suggested they renew their wedding vows after Emma was healthy enough to come home. "I want to be the husband you deserve and the father Emma needs," he said, squeezing her hand. "Can you forgive me?" Sarah wanted to forgive him more than she wanted to breathe. The thought of their little family reunited, of Emma growing up with both parents who loved her, of rebuilding the life they had planned together. It was everything she had prayed for during those long nights in the NICU. "Yes," she whispered, "I forgive you." But Sarah's happiness was short-lived. 2 days later, she was depositing David's check at the bank when her phone rang. It was her attorney, and her voice was urgent. "Sarah, you need to get to my office immediately. We have a problem." At the law office, Sarah's attorney showed her a video on her laptop. It was security footage from the hospital cafeteria, showing Sarah and David's reconciliation conversation, but the audio had been edited and spliced together to make Sarah sound demanding and manipulative. In the edited version, Sarah appeared to be threatening David, demanding money in exchange for access to Emma, and blackmailing him with the affair scandal. David's responses had been cut and rearranged to make him sound like a victim trying to placate an unstable ex-wife. "This is impossible," Sarah said, watching herself say words she had never spoken. "They've completely fabricated this conversation." "It gets worse," her attorney said grimly. "The check you deposited yesterday, David's team is claiming it was extortion money that you demanded in exchange for not going public with lies about the affair." Sarah's stomach dropped. "But he offered me the money freely. Jessica was standing right there when he gave it to me. Jessica is claiming she tried to talk David out of giving you money because she was worried about your mental state. She says you've been harassing them both, demanding payment to stay quiet about your false accusations." The edited video had already been leaked to social media, where it was spreading like wildfire. Gold Digger Greenwich was trending on Twitter, with thousands of people commenting on what appeared to be Sarah extorting her wealthy husband. Greenwich wife caught on video blackmailing, husband for baby money. Read the headline on multiple gossip blogs. The comments were vicious. "This woman is absolutely disgusting, using her sick baby to manipulate money out of her ex-husband. Hope this video gets her thrown in jail for extortion. That poor man just wants to move on with his life. She's obviously mentally ill. Thank God the dad is fighting for custody." Sarah's TikTok account, which she had started to document her story, was flooded with hate comments and death threats. Her Instagram was hacked and filled with pornographic images. Her email was overwhelmed with messages calling her everything from a gold digger to a psychopath. The edited video made national news, with cable TV legal experts debating whether Sarah could be prosecuted for extortion. Her face was plastered across gossip websites and social media platforms, always with the most unflattering screenshots from the security footage. But the final blow came when Sarah returned to the NICU that evening. The head nurse pulled her aside with an uncomfortable expression. "Mrs. Mitchell, I need to inform you that your visitation privileges are being temporarily suspended pending a review by hospital administration. What why? We've received complaints about your behavior and concerns about your emotional stability. Until the legal situation is resolved, Mr. Mitchell and Ms. Martinez will be Emma's primary approved visitors. Sarah watched through the NICU windows as Jessica held her daughter for the first time. Wearing Sarah's grandmother's pearl necklace and the engagement ring that symbolized promises David had never intended to keep. Jessica was bottle-feeding Emma with the breast milk Sarah had pumped just hours earlier. That night, Sarah sat in her tiny studio apartment, scrolling through the endless stream of hate comments and feeling more alone than she had ever felt in her life. Her phone rang, and for a moment she hoped it might be David calling to explain that this was all a misunderstanding. Instead, it was her landlord. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm sorry to do this, but I'm going to need you to vacate the apartment by the end of the week. I've been getting calls all day from people who saw you on the news, and I can't have that kind of attention on my property. Sarah hung up and realized she was about to become homeless while her premature daughter was in the hospital, fighting for her life. She had been systematically destroyed by people who were supposed to love her, and now she couldn't even afford a place to live. But as Sarah stared at the hate comments flooding her social media accounts, she noticed something the trolls hadn't picked up on. In the background of several photos Jessica had posted to Instagram, Sarah could see medical equipment and hospital room numbers. Jessica was documenting her visits to Emma and inadvertently creating a timeline that didn't match the story she was telling in court. Sarah began screenshotting everything, building her own evidence file. If David and Jessica wanted to play dirty, she would learn their game and beat them at it. She didn't know it yet, but her careful documentation would eventually expose a network of financial predators that stretched far beyond her own marriage. Sarah's mother arrived from Ohio on a red-eye flight with nothing but a carry-on bag and a fierce determination to save her daughter and granddaughter. Linda Mitchell had raised Sarah alone after her father's death when Sarah was 12, working double shifts as a nurse to pay for Sarah's college education. She had never liked David, though she had kept her concerns to herself during the marriage. "You're coming home with me," Linda announced when she found Sarah crying in the hospital parking garage after being banned from the NICU. "Pack whatever you have. We're driving to Cleveland tonight." "I can't leave Emma," Sarah protested. "She needs me." "Emma needs a mother who's strong enough to fight for her," Linda replied firmly. "Right now, you're drowning. Come home, get your bearings, and then we'll figure out how to win this war." The drive from Connecticut to Ohio felt like a funeral procession. Sarah's entire life fit into the back of her mother's Honda Civic, a suitcase of clothes, a box of Emma's preemie outfits that she had never gotten to use, and a laptop computer that contained the only evidence she had of David's systematic destruction of their marriage. Cleveland was a shock after Greenwich. Linda lived in a modest ranch house in Parma, a working-class suburb where the biggest drama was usually about snow removal or high school football. Sarah's childhood bedroom had been converted into a craft room, so she found herself sleeping on a pull-out couch in the converted garage that her mother had turned into a small apartment for extra income. The garage was insulated and heated, but it was still a far cry from the 5,000-square-foot mansion where Sarah had planned to raise Emma. The contrast was so stark it made Sarah laugh through her tears, from Greenwich socialite to garage dweller in the span of 3 months. "I know it's not what you're used to," Linda said apologetically as they set up the pull-out bed. "But it's clean and warm, and you can stay as long as you need to." "Mom, it's perfect," Sarah said. And surprisingly, she meant it. For the first time in months, she felt safe. The next morning, Sarah called the NICU to check on Emma. The nurse's report was cautiously optimistic. Emma was gaining weight steadily and breathing more on her own. She might be ready to come home in another month, assuming she continued to improve. "When she's discharged, where will she be going?" Sarah asked. "That will depend on the custody arrangements," the nurse replied carefully. "We'll need legal documentation of who has guardianship before we can release her." Sarah hung up and realized she had a month to figure out how to win custody of her daughter from a man with unlimited resources and no conscience. Sitting in her mother's garage apartment, wearing Target pajamas instead of designer clothes. She felt completely powerless. That's when Maria Santos called. "Sarah, it's Maria from the NICU. I hope you don't mind that I got your number from the hospital directory." Maria. Sarah was surprised how happy she was to hear from her NICU friend. "How's Diego?" "He's doing great, actually. But I'm calling about you. I saw what happened on the news. And I want you to know that every parent in that NICU knows it's all lies. We've been watching you with Emma every day for weeks. You're a devoted mother. And anyone who says otherwise is either blind or being paid to lie." The validation from someone who had witnessed her daily devotion to Emma brought tears to Sarah's eyes. "Thank you. I needed to hear that." "There's something else," Maria continued. "My cousin Elena is a therapist who specializes in helping women recover from narcissistic abuse. She's been following your story and thinks she might be able to help. Would you be willing to talk to her?" Dr. Elena Rodriguez turned out to be exactly what Sarah needed. A bilingual therapist who worked primarily with Latina women escaping domestic violence, but who had extensive experience with financial abuse in all communities. She operated out of a community center in Cleveland's diverse Clark Fulton neighborhood, charging on a sliding scale that made therapy accessible to working-class women. "Financial abuse is one of the most effective tools of control," Dr. Rodriguez explained during their first session. "It's designed to make you feel powerless and dependent. But Sarah, you're not powerless. You're just operating in a system that's rigged against you." Over the following weeks, Dr. Rodriguez helped Sarah understand the patterns of manipulation that had defined her marriage, the isolation from friends and family, the gradual erosion of her financial independence, the gaslighting that made her question her own perceptions and memories. David didn't suddenly become abusive when he started the affair. Dr. Rodriguez explained. The affair was just the final stage of a control system he'd been building for years. Think about it. When did you stop having your own bank account? When did you stop working? When did you stop making decisions without consulting him first? Sarah began to see her marriage clearly for the first time. David had systematically isolated her from her support systems, made her financially dependent, and then used that dependence to control her behavior. The affair with Jessica wasn't a midlife crisis. It was the culmination of a decade-long plan. "But why?" Sarah asked. "Why go through all that trouble if he didn't want to be married to me? Why not just get divorced years ago? Control addicts don't want to lose their supply." Dr. Rodriguez replied, "You represented status, domesticity, and admiration. Jessica represents excitement and adventure. In his mind, he should be able to have both without consequences." Dr. Rodriguez recommended several books that opened Sarah's eyes to the reality of her situation. Why Does He Do That? By Lundy Bancroft helped her understand the psychology of abusive men. The Gift of Fear by Gavin DeBecker taught her to trust her instincts about dangerous situations. Meanwhile, Sarah started working remotely for a small marketing company owned by a college friend who was willing to pay her $15 an hour to manage social media accounts for local businesses. It wasn't much money, but it was honest work that made Sarah feel useful for the first time in months. Living in her mother's garage apartment, Sarah rediscovered parts of herself that had been buried during her marriage. She started running again, something she had abandoned when David complained that her morning runs interfered with his breakfast schedule. She began reading voraciously, devouring books about everything from personal finance to child development. Most importantly, she started documenting her story on TikTok and Instagram, carefully laying out the timeline of David's financial abuse and Jessica's involvement. Her first video gained 100,000 views in 2 days, mostly from women sharing similar stories of betrayal and financial manipulation. "I thought I was stupid for not seeing the signs," Sarah told her growing online audience. "But I've learned that predators are experts at hiding their true nature. They don't start with obvious abuse. They start with love bombing and gradually escalate the control until you don't recognize your own life anymore." The comments on her videos were overwhelmingly supportive, with thousands of women sharing their own stories of financial abuse and betrayal. Sarah realized she wasn't alone. There was an entire community of women who had been systematically destroyed by wealthy, powerful men who faced no consequences for their actions. But Sarah's growing social media following caught the attention of someone unexpected. Marcus Thompson, David's former business partner, sent her a private message that would change everything. "Sarah, I've been watching your videos, and I think there's something you need to know about David. What happened to you isn't isolated. He's done this before, to other women, other business partners. I have evidence, but I need to know if you're willing to fight back." Sarah video called Marcus that night, speaking to him for the first time since David had forced him out of their company 2 years earlier. Marcus was a soft-spoken engineer who had co-founded the tech company with David in college. He had been pushed out when he questioned some of David's financial decisions. "David has a pattern," Marcus explained. "He targets successful women, isolates them through marriage or business partnerships, gains control of their assets, then destroys them when they're no longer useful. You're the third wife I know of, and there have been several female business partners who've been destroyed the same way." "Third wife?" Sarah's voice cracked. "What do you mean, third wife?" "Sarah, David was married twice before he met you. Both marriages ended with the women financially ruined and publicly humiliated. I have documentation of everything. Court records, financial documents, testimonies from his previous victims." Sarah felt the familiar sensation of her world tilting sideways. David had told her he had been married once before, briefly, in college. He had never mentioned a second marriage, and certainly not a pattern of destroying women. "Why didn't you come forward before?" Sarah asked. "I tried," Marcus said sadly. "I reached out to his second wife, Catherine, but she was too traumatized to speak publicly. David's legal team had destroyed her so completely that she was afraid to even acknowledge the marriage had happened. But Sarah, your social media presence has given us something we never had before, a platform to tell the truth." That night, Sarah lay on the pull-out couch in her mother's garage, staring at the ceiling and processing the revelation that she was part of a pattern of abuse that stretched back years. David wasn't just a cheating husband. He was a serial predator who had perfected the art of destroying women's lives. But for the first time since discovering the affair, Sarah felt something other than despair. She felt angry, and anger, she was learning, could be a powerful motivator for change. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "David is planning to flee the country with Jessica and the money he's stolen. We have about 2 weeks to stop him." Sarah sat up in bed, her mind racing. Emma was scheduled to be discharged from the NICU in exactly 2 weeks. If David disappeared with Jessica and their stolen assets, Sarah would never see her daughter again. The garage apartment suddenly felt less like rock bottom and more like a launching pad for the fight of her life. Marcus Thompson arrived in Cleveland on a gray November morning, carrying a briefcase that looked like it belonged in a spy movie. Sarah met him at a coffee shop near her mother's house, nervous about seeing David's former business partner for the first time since the company Christmas party 2 years ago. Marcus looked older than she remembered, his brown hair now streaked with gray and deep lines around his eyes that spoke of stress and sleepless nights. But when he smiled at Sarah, she saw the same kind, intelligent man who had always been David's moral compass, until David had decided he didn't need a conscience anymore. "Thank you for meeting me," Marcus said, sliding into the booth across from her. "I know this must be overwhelming." "Tell me about the other women," Sarah said without preamble. "I need to know what I'm dealing with." Marcus opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. David's first wife was named Jennifer Walsh. They married right after college in 1995. Jennifer had inherited a small trust fund from her grandparents, about $200,000, which was a fortune to David back then. He showed Sarah copies of divorce records, court filings, and newspaper articles. The pattern was eerily familiar: a whirlwind romance, a quick marriage, gradual financial control, and then a devastating divorce that left Jennifer with nothing. Jennifer tried to fight back, but David's legal team painted her as an unstable alcoholic. She lost everything and eventually moved to Oregon to start over. She works as a cashier at a grocery store now. The second wife, Catherine Chen, had been a successful real estate developer in San Francisco when she met David in 2003. She owned several properties worth millions and had a thriving business. By the time David was finished with her, she had lost her properties, her business, and her reputation. Catherine was hospitalized for a nervous breakdown after the divorce, Marcus explained. David's team spread rumors that she was embezzling from clients. She lost her real estate license and had to declare bankruptcy. She's a teacher now in a small town in Northern California, too afraid to even use her real name on social media. Sarah stared at the photos of these women, both attractive, successful, confident in their prime, then broken and hollowed out after their encounters with David. She saw her own future in their faces. "How did you get all this information?" Sarah asked. "I've been documenting David's behavior for years," Marcus replied. "I knew eventually he would go too far, and I wanted to be ready. But Sarah, what's happening to you is different from the others." "How so?" "You're fighting back publicly. Jennifer and Catherine were destroyed privately. Their reputations ruined in their professional circles, but not nationally. David made a mistake by allowing your story to go viral. It's given us a platform that we never had before." Marcus pulled out another folder, this one containing financial documents that made Sarah's head spin. Bank records, wire transfer receipts, incorporation papers for shell companies in countries she'd never heard of. "David has been systematically stealing from your marriage for 3 years, not 18 months like you thought," Marcus explained. "He started moving money right after Emma was conceived. The fertility treatments weren't just about having a baby. They were about creating a legal claim to child support while he planned his exit strategy." The scope of David's theft was staggering. He had moved over $8 million into offshore accounts, hidden behind a maze of shell companies and trust structures that Jessica had helped establish through her connections in international finance. "But there's something else," Marcus said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "David isn't planning to stay in the United States. He and Jessica have been setting up a new life in Singapore, where they can't be extradited for financial crimes." Sarah's blood ran cold. "What about Emma?" "That's the worst part. They're planning to take her with them. David will argue that as Emma's father, he has the right to relocate for his work. By the time you could fight it in court, they'd be gone." Sarah felt her carefully constructed composure cracking. "Based on the financial transfers I've been tracking, I think they're planning to leave right after Emma is discharged from the NICU. Maybe sooner if they think we're getting too close to the truth." That afternoon, Marcus introduced Sarah to Rebecca Chen, a pro bono attorney who specialized in complex financial crimes. Rebecca worked for a legal aid organization that helped women escape financial abuse, and she had been following Sarah's story through social media. "What we need to do is build a federal case against David," Rebecca explained during their meeting at her downtown Cleveland office. "Financial fraud, money laundering, possibly tax evasion. If we can get federal investigators interested, we can freeze his assets and prevent him from leaving the country." "How long will that take?" Sarah asked. "If we're lucky and everything goes perfectly, maybe 2 weeks. But Sarah, you need to understand that David has been planning this for years. He's hired the best lawyers money can buy, and he's had time to cover his tracks. This isn't going to be easy." That evening, Sarah started a new chapter of her social media campaign. Instead of just telling her own story, she began reaching out to other women who had been destroyed by wealthy, powerful men. The response was overwhelming. Within a week, Sarah's TikTok following had grown to 500,000 people. Her comment sections were filled with women sharing their own stories of financial abuse, gaslighting, and systematic destruction. Many had never spoken publicly about their experiences because they were afraid of retaliation or didn't think anyone would believe them. "I thought I was the only one," wrote one commenter. "My ex-husband did the exact same thing. Love bombing, isolation, financial control, then complete destruction when I tried to leave. Thank you for making me feel less alone." Sarah realized she had accidentally created a support network for women who had survived narcissistic abuse. She started hosting live sessions where women could share their stories and offer advice to others who were still trapped in abusive relationships. But the most important development came when one of Sarah's followers sent her a private message that changed everything. Sarah, I saw your videos about David Mitchell. I think he tried to do the same thing to my sister. She died by suicide 3 years ago after her divorce. But I've always suspected there was more to the story. Would you be willing to talk? The sister's name was Amanda Rodriguez, and her story was the most heartbreaking yet. Amanda had been a successful surgeon in Chicago when she met David at a medical conference in 2018. They had a brief but intense relationship that ended when Amanda discovered David was married to Sarah. Amanda tried to warn you, her sister explained during a video call. She found your contact information and tried to call you several times, but David convinced her that you already knew about their relationship and were okay with it. I never got any calls, Sarah said, her heart breaking for a woman she had never met. David was monitoring Amanda's communications. She told me he had somehow gained access to her phone and email accounts. When she tried to expose him publicly, her medical practice was suddenly investigated for insurance fraud. She lost her license, her savings, everything. The suicide happened 6 months later. Sarah felt physically sick. Amanda Rodriguez had tried to save her from David's abuse and had been destroyed for her efforts. Now she was dead, and David was planning to do the same thing to Sarah and take Emma with him. I have Amanda's journals, her sister continued. She documented everything David did to her, including evidence of him accessing her personal accounts and sabotaging her career. I've been too afraid to come forward, but watching your videos has given me courage. That night, Sarah sat in her mother's garage apartment, surrounded by boxes of evidence that painted a picture of David as a serial predator who had been destroying women's lives for over 2 decades. Amanda Rodriguez's journals contained detailed accounts of David's manipulation tactics, including his use of technology to monitor and control his victims. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Stop digging into things that don't concern you, or you'll end up like Amanda Rodriguez. Sarah screenshot the threat and forwarded it to Marcus and Rebecca. She was getting close to something that David was desperate to keep hidden. That meant she was on the right track, but time was running out. Emma was scheduled to be discharged from the NICU in exactly 1 week, and Marcus had intercepted communications suggesting that David and Jessica were accelerating their timeline for leaving the country. Sarah looked at the photo of Amanda Rodriguez that her sister had sent, a brilliant, beautiful surgeon who had tried to do the right thing and paid for it with her life. Sarah wouldn't let Amanda's death be in vain, and she wouldn't let David destroy any more women. I'm sorry I couldn't save you, Amanda, Sarah whispered to the photo, but I'm going to make sure he never hurts anyone else. The next morning, Sarah called the FBI. Special Agent Diana Torres of the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit looked exactly like what Sarah had expected from watching too many crime shows. Sharp suit, no-nonsense demeanor, and eyes that missed nothing. She sat across from Sarah in Rebecca Chen's law office, reviewing the boxes of evidence that Marcus and Sarah had compiled over the past 2 weeks. This is extensive documentation, Agent Torres said, her voice carrying a slight Texas accent. Mr. Thompson, how long have you been gathering this information? 4 years, Marcus replied. I started documenting David's behavior after he forced me out of our company. I suspected he was running some kind of long-term financial fraud scheme, but I didn't realize how many victims there were until Sarah went public with her story. Agent Torres examined Amanda Rodriguez's journals, her expression growing darker with each page. Dr. Rodriguez contacted our Chicago field office twice before her death, claiming she was being stalked and harassed by David Mitchell. The local agents classified it as a domestic dispute and referred her to local police. What happened with the local police? Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. David's legal team convinced them that Dr. Rodriguez was having a psychotic break following their relationship. They had medical records showing she had been prescribed antidepressants, and David's lawyers painted her as an unstable woman who couldn't accept that their affair was over. Sarah felt a familiar chill. It was the same playbook David was using against her. Paint the victim as mentally unstable, use their own vulnerability against them, and rely on the system's bias toward wealthy, powerful men. The difference now, Agent Torres continued, is that we have pattern evidence, 3 confirmed victims, possibly more, and documentation of systematic financial fraud across multiple states. That gives us federal jurisdiction. The next few days moved with breathtaking speed. Federal agents executed search warrants on David's offices, his Greenwich mansion, and Jessica's apartment. They froze bank accounts in 5 countries and seized computers, phones, and financial records. Sarah watched the news coverage from her mother's living room, feeling surreal as CNN reported on the Connecticut tech millionaire financial fraud investigation. David's company's stock collapsed as investors learned about the federal investigation. Jessica was arrested at her office, led out in handcuffs while news cameras captured every moment, but David was nowhere to be found. "He's definitely in Singapore," Agent Torres told Sarah during a conference call. "We tracked him through customs records and credit card usage. He flew out 3 days ago on a private jet." "What about Emma?" Sarah's voice was tight with panic. "Can he try to take her out of the country, not without your consent or a court order, which he won't get now that he's a fugitive?" "But Sarah, you need to understand that extradition from Singapore is complicated. It could take months or even years to bring him back to face charges." Sarah didn't care about months or years. She cared about the next week, when Emma would finally be strong enough to leave the NICU. After 7 weeks of fighting for her life, Sarah's daughter was ready to come home, and Sarah was going to make sure that home was with her. The media attention brought unexpected benefits. Sarah's social media following exploded to over 2 million across all platforms, and she started receiving speaking requests from organizations that help domestic violence survivors. More importantly, the publicity attracted the attention of other David Mitchell victims who had been too afraid to come forward. "Sarah Mitchell gave me the courage to tell my story," said Catherine Chen during a live television interview. "I thought I was the only one. I thought I was crazy, but seeing her fight back showed me that we don't have to accept being destroyed by these predators." Sarah used her platform to connect survivors with resources, therapists who specialized in narcissistic abuse, attorneys who worked pro bono for domestic violence victims, financial advisors who helped women rebuild after economic abuse. "This isn't just about my story anymore," Sarah told her followers during a live stream. "This is about creating a support network for all of us who've been systematically destroyed by people who were supposed to love us." With some of David's assets frozen and recovered, Sarah was able to move from her mother's garage into a modest but comfortable 2-bedroom apartment in Cleveland Heights. It was nothing like the Greenwich mansion, but it had everything she and Emma needed: a safe nursery, a kitchen where Sarah could cook healthy meals, and a living room where she could work on her growing advocacy platform. Emma's homecoming was covered by local news as a feel-good story. The premature baby who had survived 7 weeks in the NICU was finally going home with her mother, who had fought for custody against overwhelming odds. Sarah carried Emma out of the hospital in a pink onesie that read, "Survivor." And for the first time in months, she felt genuinely happy. But the happiness was overshadowed by devastating news from Singapore. David had been found dead in his luxury hotel suite, apparently from a drug overdose. Singapore police found evidence of cocaine and prescription pills, along with a suicide note claiming he couldn't live with the shame of his actions. "I'm sorry for the pain I've caused." The note read, "Sarah, please raise Emma to be better than me. Marcus, you were right about everything. Jessica, you deserve better than what I've become." Sarah felt conflicted about David's death. Part of her was relieved that she wouldn't have to spend years fighting him in court for custody of Emma. But part of her had wanted him to face consequences for Amanda Rodriguez's death and all the other women he had destroyed. Jessica pleaded guilty to financial fraud charges and received a reduced sentence in exchange for cooperating with federal investigators and helping them recover stolen assets. She was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution to David's victims. During her sentencing hearing, Jessica finally showed genuine remorse. "I want to apologize specifically to Sarah Mitchell and her daughter Emma," she said through tears. "I was so blinded by greed and jealousy that I participated in destroying the life of someone who had been nothing but kind to me. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make amends." Sarah chose not to attend the sentencing. She was too busy building her new life to waste time on the people who had tried to destroy her. 1 year after Emma's birth, Sarah was invited to speak at a congressional hearing about financial abuse and the need for stronger protections for domestic violence survivors. She testified about how easily wealthy abusers could hide assets offshore and use expensive legal teams to destroy their victims. Financial abuse is domestic violence, Sarah told the House Judiciary Committee. When someone systematically isolates you from resources and uses money as a weapon of control, they are committing a crime that should be prosecuted as seriously as physical violence. Sarah's advocacy work led to job offers from several nonprofit organizations, but she decided to start her own consulting firm, helping women rebuild their finances after escaping abusive relationships. Phoenix Financial Recovery launched with Sarah as CEO and Marcus as her technology partner. We're not just helping women balance their checkbooks, Sarah explained to a reporter from Forbes. We're helping them reclaim their economic independence and build lives that can't be destroyed by someone else's greed or cruelty. Emma thrived in Cleveland, growing into a happy, healthy toddler who had no memory of her dramatic early weeks. Sarah chose to tell her age-appropriate versions of the truth, that her daddy had made some bad choices, but that didn't mean he didn't love her, and that sometimes families look different than what people expect. As Sarah tucked Emma into bed on her first birthday, she reflected on how much their lives had changed. A year ago, she had been a desperate woman fighting for her daughter's life in a NICU, abandoned by her husband and betrayed by her best friend. Now she was a successful entrepreneur with a platform to help other women, raising a healthy daughter in a home filled with love and security. "Thank you for making me strong enough to fight for us," Sarah whispered to Emma as her daughter drifted off to sleep. But as Sarah cleaned up from Emma's birthday party, she noticed a woman she didn't recognize standing at the edge of her property, watching the house. The woman made no move to approach, but something about her intense stare made Sarah uncomfortable. When Sarah looked again a few minutes later, the woman was gone, but she had left something behind. A manila envelope tucked under Sarah's car windshield wiper. Sarah's hands trembled as she opened the manila envelope in her kitchen after putting Emma to bed. Inside was a thick packet of legal documents, photographs, and what appeared to be DNA test results. The cover letter was handwritten in careful script. "Mrs. Mitchell, my name is Patricia Wilson. I was David Mitchell's first wife, not Jennifer Walsh, who was actually his second wife. I've been following your story and believe you deserve to know the truth about Emma's paternity and the real scope of David's crimes. Please call me. We need to talk." Patricia. Sarah's mind reeled as she processed this information. Marcus had told her about Jennifer Walsh and Catherine Shen, but he had never mentioned a Patricia Wilson. If this woman was telling the truth, then David had been married 4 times, not 3, and his pattern of destroying women went back even further than anyone had realized. The DNA test results made Sarah's legs give out. She collapsed into a kitchen chair, staring at the documents that proved Emma was not David's biological daughter. According to the lab report, Emma's father was Marcus Thompson. Sarah's phone rang, making her jump. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. "Sarah, this is Patricia Wilson. I left the envelope for you. I know this is a shock, but I need to explain everything before you hear it from someone else." "Emma isn't David's daughter." Sarah's voice came out as a whisper. "No, she's not. And Sarah, I don't think her conception was an accident. I believe Jessica Martinez deliberately sabotaged your birth control as part of a larger plan to destroy your marriage and gain access to David's assets." Patricia's story was more disturbing than anything Sarah had imagined. She had been married to David from 1990 to 1995 when they were both young, and David was just starting his first tech company. Patricia had been a software engineer who helped David build his initial business, but he had gradually pushed her out and stolen her code contributions. "David didn't just steal money from his wives," Patricia explained. "He stole our intellectual property, our professional accomplishments, even our identities. The foundation technology for his current company came from software I developed in the early 90s. But Patricia's most shocking revelation concerned Emma's conception. According to documents Patricia had obtained through a private investigator, Jessica had been planning to break up Sarah and David's marriage for over 2 years. The plan included sabotaging Sarah's birth control to create a pregnancy that would either force David to leave Sarah or give Jessica ammunition to paint Sarah as a manipulative woman trying to trap her husband. Jessica replaced your birth control pills with sugar pills for 3 months, Patricia said. She had access to your medicine cabinet through her frequent visits to your house. The pregnancy wasn't an accident, it was a weapon. Sarah thought back to that time period 2 years ago, when she had finally gotten pregnant after months of trying. She remembered being surprised by how quickly it happened after so many failed attempts. She also remembered that Jessica had been especially helpful during that time, bringing Sarah prenatal vitamins and often helping organize her medication. But the DNA test, Sarah said, looking at the papers again. How is Marcus Emma's father? Patricia's voice became gentle. Sarah, do you remember the weekend in Martha's Vineyard about 9 months before Emma was born? You and David were fighting about starting a family, and you went to that marriage retreat. Sarah did remember. It had been a difficult weekend where she and David had met with a marriage counselor and other couples struggling with fertility issues. Marcus had been there with his girlfriend at the time, working through their own relationship problems. Marcus and I have stayed in touch over the years, Patricia continued. He told me about that weekend, how you and David had a terrible fight on the second night and David stormed out. Marcus found you crying by the pool. The memory came flooding back. David had accused Sarah of being obsessed with getting pregnant and said maybe they should take a break from trying. Sarah had been devastated, and Marcus had found her sobbing in the dark by the retreat center's pool. He had sat with her for hours, talking about dreams and disappointments and the complexities of love. One thing had led to another. Sarah had been vulnerable and heartbroken, and Marcus had been kind and understanding. They had spent one night together, both knowing it was a mistake, but both needing comfort that their partners weren't providing. I never told David, Sarah whispered. Marcus and I agreed it was a mistake that couldn't happen again. I know, Patricia said gently. But Jessica knew. She had been monitoring your communications, probably through spyware on your phone. She knew about your night with Marcus, and she used that information to time the birth control sabotage perfectly. The pieces of the puzzle fell into place with sickening clarity. Jessica had engineered Sarah's pregnancy, knowing that the timing would make it unclear whether David or Marcus was the father. If the baby was David's, Jessica could use the pregnancy to argue that Sarah was trying to trap him. If the baby was Marcus's, Jessica could use that information to destroy Sarah's marriage and reputation. Jessica planned all of this, Sarah said, her voice filled with a mixture of rage and awe at the scope of the manipulation. She sabotaged my birth control, knowing I had been with Marcus. She was creating a situation where she could destroy me no matter what happened. And it almost worked, Patricia agreed. But Sarah, there's something else you need to know. Jessica is pregnant. Sarah's blood turned to ice. What? She conceived while she was with David in Singapore. She's about 3 months along now, and she's planning to claim that David's death has left her as a single mother who deserves access to his estate for her child's sake. The cruelty was breathtaking. Jessica had destroyed Sarah's family, participated in driving David to suicide, and now she was planning to use her own pregnancy to claim the assets she had helped steal. Jessica has been in contact with David's estate lawyers from federal prison, Patricia continued. She's arguing that her unborn child should inherit David's recovered assets since Emma isn't his biological daughter. She's planning to challenge Emma's inheritance on the grounds that Sarah committed paternity fraud. Sarah hung up the phone and sat in her kitchen, processing the revelation that her entire understanding of the past 2 years had been wrong. Emma wasn't the product of a marriage that had gone wrong. She was the result of a calculated plan to destroy that marriage. And now Jessica was trying to use David's death and her own pregnancy to steal what little Sarah had managed to recover. But as Sarah looked at the DNA test results again, she realized something that Patricia might not have considered. Marcus Thompson wasn't just Emma's biological father. He was also Sarah's business partner and one of the few people who had consistently supported her throughout the nightmare with David. Sarah had been so focused on the shock of Emma's paternity that she hadn't considered the positive implications. Marcus was a good man who had already shown he cared about Emma's well-being. He had risked his own safety to help expose David's crimes, and he had been building a business with Sarah based on mutual respect and shared values. Maybe this revelation wasn't the disaster it seemed to be. Maybe it was an opportunity for Emma to have a father who would actually love and protect her. Sarah called Marcus immediately. "Marcus, I need to tell you something, and I need you to sit down." After she explained everything Patricia had told her, Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Emma is my daughter," he finally said, his voice filled with wonder rather than panic. "Are you okay with that?" Sarah asked. "Sarah, Emma is the most beautiful, perfect little girl I've ever seen. If she's my daughter, then I'm the luckiest man in the world. The question is, are you okay with me being her father? Marcus, you've been more of a father to her already than David ever was. You fought to protect her when David was planning to abandon her. You helped me build a life where I could take care of her. If the DNA test is right, then Emma has been lucky to have you as her father all along." But their conversation was interrupted by breaking news on Sarah's phone. Jessica Martinez had escaped from federal prison during a medical transport to treat complications with her pregnancy. She was considered armed and dangerous, and federal marshals were conducting a manhunt. Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized that Jessica was free, desperate, and had nothing left to lose. And she knew exactly where Sarah and Emma lived. Sarah's hands shook as she dialed 911, watching the news report about Jessica's escape scroll across her phone screen. The local police arrived within minutes, followed by federal marshals who had been tracking Jessica's movements since her escape 12 hours earlier. "Ms. Mitchell, we have reason to believe Jessica Martinez is heading toward Cleveland," Marshal Jennifer Hayes explained as her team swept through Sarah's apartment. "She's desperate and potentially dangerous. We're going to station agents here until she's recaptured." Sarah clutched Emma closer, her daughter oblivious to the danger as she played with a stuffed animal Marcus had brought her. What exactly happened during her escape? She overpowered a prison guard during transport to the hospital for pregnancy complications, Marshal Hayes replied grimly. She's trained in self-defense and clearly planned this escape carefully. We found evidence in her cell that she's been planning this for weeks. Marcus arrived within an hour, having driven from Chicago the moment Sarah called him. He took one look at the federal agents stationed around Sarah's apartment and immediately went into protective mode. "We're not staying here," he declared. "It's too exposed, too predictable. Sarah, pack whatever you and Emma need for a few days. We're going somewhere. Jessica can't find us." They ended up in a safe house provided by the federal marshals, a nondescript ranch home in a quiet suburb an hour outside Cleveland. Sarah, Emma, and Marcus spent the next 3 days in protective custody while law enforcement agencies across the Midwest searched for Jessica. During those 3 days, Sarah and Marcus had the most honest conversations of their lives. They talked about the night at Martha's Vineyard, about their growing feelings for each other over the past year, and about what it meant for Emma to be Marcus's biological daughter. "I loved her before I knew she was mine," Marcus told Sarah as they watched Emma take her first tentative steps across the safe house living room. "And I've been falling in love with her mother for longer than I care to admit." "Marcus, I don't want you to feel obligated because of the DNA test," Sarah replied. "Emma and I have built a good life. We don't need rescuing." "I know you don't need rescuing," Marcus smiled. "That's one of the things I love about you. You're not the same woman who was married to David. You're stronger, more independent, more sure of yourself. I'm not trying to rescue you. I'm asking if you want to build a life together as partners." Their conversation was interrupted by Marshal Hayes' radio crackling with urgent updates. Jessica had been spotted at Cleveland Hopkins Airport, attempting to board a flight to Mexico using a stolen identity. "We've got her," Marshal Hayes announced after a tense hour of radio chatter. "Jessica Martinez is in custody. The immediate threat is over." But the capture of Jessica revealed the final pieces of a puzzle that was even more complex than anyone had imagined. During her interrogation, Jessica broke down and confessed to a plan that had been years in the making. "I never loved David," she admitted to federal investigators. "I was working with a network of people who target wealthy men for financial fraud. We identify men with assets, place someone close to them to gain their trust, then systematically steal everything they have." Jessica revealed that she had been recruited by Patricia Wilson, the same Patricia Wilson who had contacted Sarah with information about Emma's paternity. Patricia wasn't actually David's first wife. She was the leader of a sophisticated fraud ring that had been operating for over a decade. Patricia Wilson is a con artist who's stolen millions from wealthy men across the country, Agent Torres explained to Sarah during a debriefing session. She recruits women like Jessica to infiltrate wealthy social circles and identify targets. David wasn't a predator. He was a victim who got caught in a web of manipulation that destroyed his ability to trust anyone. The revelation turned everything Sarah thought she knew upside down. David hadn't been a serial abuser of women. He had been repeatedly victimized by a criminal organization that specialized in financial fraud and psychological manipulation. The other wives Marcus had told her about were either fellow victims or part of the fraud ring itself. Jennifer Walsh was another victim, Agent Torres continued. Catherine Chen was working with Patricia's organization. Amanda Rodriguez discovered the fraud and was murdered to keep her quiet. It wasn't suicide. Sarah felt sick as she realized the scope of the deception. Patricia Wilson had used Sarah's own story to manipulate her, feeding her false information to turn her against David, while positioning herself to claim his assets through a complex legal scheme. "The DNA test Patricia showed you was fake," Agent Torres explained. "Emma is David's biological daughter. Marcus, I'm sorry, you were used as well." Patricia needed to create doubt about Emma's paternity to support Jessica's claim to David's estate. Marcus took the news with characteristic grace. "I may not be Emma's biological father, but I still want to be her father in every way that matters," he told Sarah. "If you'll let me." The final confrontation came at the Cleveland Federal Courthouse, where Patricia Wilson was arrested as she attempted to file legal documents claiming David's estate on behalf of her criminal organization. She had been posing as a paralegal and had gained access to sensitive legal proceedings involving David's asset recovery. Sarah watched through bulletproof glass as Patricia was led away in handcuffs, marveling at how normal the woman looked. She appeared to be in her 50s, well-dressed and professional, nothing like the criminal mastermind she actually was. "How many people has she hurt?" Sarah asked Agent Torres. "We're still investigating, but we think Patricia's organization has targeted at least 30 wealthy men over the past 15 years. The total stolen assets are probably in the hundreds of millions." Jessica received an additional 10 years in prison for her escape and her role in the broader fraud conspiracy. She also provided crucial testimony that helped federal investigators dismantle Patricia's entire criminal network. During Jessica's final sentencing hearing, she asked to speak directly to Sarah. "I know you have no reason to forgive me," Jessica said, her voice barely audible. "But I want you to know that everything I felt for you as a friend was real. I got recruited into something I didn't understand, and by the time I realized how evil it was, I was in too deep to get out without destroying my own life." Sarah chose not to respond directly, but she felt a complicated mix of emotions. Jessica had been both perpetrator and victim, manipulated by Patricia's organization, but still responsible for the choices she made. 1 year after Patricia Wilson's arrest, Sarah stood in the offices of Phoenix Financial Recovery, watching her team of counselors and financial advisors help women rebuild their lives after economic abuse. The company had grown to serve clients across the Midwest and had partnerships with domestic violence organizations in 12 states. Emma, now 2 years old, played in the office daycare while Sarah worked. She was a bright, happy child who had no memory of the chaos surrounding her birth. Marcus had legally adopted her after he and Sarah married in a small ceremony attended by their families and the NICU nurses who had helped save Emma's life. "Mama work?" Emma asked, toddling over to Sarah's desk with a picture she had colored. "Mama's helping other mamas," Sarah explained. lifting Emma into her lap. Just like people helped us when we needed it. Sarah's story had become a case study in business schools and law enforcement training programs. Her experience showed how sophisticated criminal organizations could destroy lives while hiding behind the appearance of domestic disputes and business disagreements. But the most important lesson, Sarah believed, was about the power of community and truth-telling. I survived because I refused to be silent, Sarah told audiences at the domestic violence conferences where she now spoke regularly. Predators rely on shame and isolation to control their victims. When we speak truth publicly and support each other, we take away their power. As Sarah put Emma down for her afternoon nap in the office daycare, she reflected on how different her life was from what she had imagined 3 years ago. She was no longer the Greenwich socialite married to a tech millionaire. Instead, she was an entrepreneur, advocate, and mother building a life based on truth, resilience, and genuine love. Her phone buzzed with a notification from her TikTok account, which now had over 5 million followers. A woman in Seattle had posted a video crediting Sarah's story with giving her the courage to leave an abusive marriage and seek help. Sarah Mitchell showed me that survival isn't just possible, it's powerful, the woman said through tears. I'm not just escaping my abuser. I'm building a life he can never touch. Sarah smiled as she read similar comments from women around the world who had found strength in her story. This was the real victory, not just surviving David and Jessica's betrayal, but transforming that survival into a force for positive change. But as Sarah settled in to review financial reports for Phoenix Financial Recovery, she noticed an unusual email in her inbox. The sender was listed as a friend, and the subject line read, "You saved my life. Now I need to save yours." The email contained a single photograph, a picture of Emma playing in the daycare, taken from outside the office building. Someone had been watching them, and they wanted Sarah to know it. Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized that Patricia Wilson's criminal network might have been larger than federal investigators had discovered. The case was supposed to be closed, the threats eliminated, the future secure. But as Sarah called security and prepared to go into lockdown mode once again, she knew that her story was far from over. There were still predators out there, still women who needed protection, still battles to be fought. The difference was that now Sarah wasn't fighting alone. She had Marcus, she had Emma, she had a community of survivors who would stand with her against whatever came next. And she was no longer the woman who had sat in that OBGYN office 3 years ago, naive and trusting and unprepared for the storm about to hit her life. She was Sarah Mitchell, survivor, advocate, and warrior, and she was ready for whatever came next.